brief discussion will go to the audit and risk in public, and then go into public we will at the end of that, so we do it. So thank you.
Welcome members, I like on the Audit and Risk Committee, and we've got a pre-circulated agenda. I'm just going to comment on a couple of things. One, when it comes to the minutes, I intend to move the minutes of the confidential into the open part of the business and adopt the confidential as part of the minute adoption. Now why I do that is there is nothing in the confidential section other than the adoption of the minutes previously. And it means that we can say that every time we meet and a lot of staff time in preparing an agenda, so we only need to confirm when we actually do go into confidential and undertakes the business. So I will be moving that. And the second thing is I'd like to give you a bit of a chairman's report before we start on section 4.1 with a couple of things you might find interesting that I've attended recently. So firstly I'll call for apologies. Any apologies? Thank you. Can I have a move for those apologies? Thank you. Has been seconded? Thank you. Those in favour say aye, those against carry. Ask for any conflicts of interest on the agenda that you might have today, or any conflicts of interest you need to notify to the Chief Executive in terms of things that have made a change since our last meeting. There appears to be none. I'll move to the confirmation of minutes. I'm going to move an amended motion on here where firstly we will take the confidential minutes and move them by resolution into the open part of today's meeting. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Those in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against carried. Now I'll do the minutes so that it'll be the minutes of the open meeting and the confidential that's been moved into the open meeting in one resolution. So confirmation of minutes, do I have a mover and a seconder for those please? Thank you. Any points of clarification you may, because it's about correctness of those minutes, so I always give opportunity to for members to look at the minutes to see if they are a true and correct record. No points to clarify. I'll now put that motion. Those in favour please say aye. Those against carry. We move to reports, and I'd just like to quickly update you on a couple of things. I attended the Local Government New South Wales conference last week in Sydney, and it's very interesting what's happening to local government in Australia, and I think we should be aware of it because our government tends to look at some of the things that are happening in Australia in terms of local government. For those who don't know, New South Wales is going through significant change. It's a process called Fit for the Future, and the state government is reviewing the form, function and ability of local government to meet the future requirements of the state of New South Wales. They have undertaken a review of every local government entity in New South Wales, and there's 152 councils in New South Wales, 41 in Sydney alone. So they've looked at all the performance of local government, and they've actually, unfortunately, marked some of them not fit for purpose going forward. In other words, they are not financially viable to move forward, and they've put out a map and marked them all red. So if you're a red council, you're not financially viable to go forward, which is quite interesting. And there is quite a significant number of them, and that is causing concern to the state government. Therefore, they're pressing ahead with substantial reform in New South Wales. The size of the councils they're looking at is somewhere between 100 to 200,000 in population, as being the minimum. They want to have 23 of the councils in Sydney alone are less than 100,000, to give you a rough idea. The outcome that's expected from this review is that there will be a saving to the ratepayer of $2 billion over 20 years. That 60% of the councils in New South Wales are not fit for the future. They are going through a very quick consultative process. The Minister, the Premier, will be putting out the proposals to local government. They'll be given 30 days to respond to the proposals, and the Premier wants to have the process completed by the end of this year. To actively encourage councils to amalgamate, the state has put up a $15 million carrot per council to form an amalgamation with their adjoining local authorities, and that can be used for progressing infrastructure within the new council area. So it's quite interesting what's happening over in the ditch, and I'm sure that one of the risks that we have this committee dealing with is two of those things: the financial sustainability of the council, and you've heard from your auditor this morning, and the second thing will be form and function of local government going forward in New Zealand, and what challenges the government puts out on that. So if you want to have a look at what's going on in New South Wales, I urge you to hop onto the website, the New South Wales Local Government website, and there's quite a number of reports there.
Excuse me, in what is proposed, are there any provisions for the community to be asked their views and possibly to vote as has happened in New Zealand?
Probably not. Unlike Perth, which I'm visiting next week to catch up on where they are, Perth was going to undertake significant reform, and the provisions, every state has different legislation on how it's dealt with in Australia. And the Minister couldn't do amalgamations without some form of public input, but they could do boundary adjustments without public input. So they were looking at putting a boundary around 2 or more councils, therefore that's a boundary adjustment rather than an amalgamation. After a long process, the state government got extremely frustrated and abandoned the process several months ago. So there's no change to local government in Western Australia. So I'm involved quite often in Australia with the reform of local government over there. I have to say, the Premier of Sydney is not only a very astute, clearly spoken, directional person, I think he carries quite a lot of weight within local government itself. And from his speech, there was no question that there was going to be reform of local government. So that'll lead me on to the 2 reports that I've asked to put on today's agenda. And as we said this morning, systems and processes are very important for the council to ensure that you have everything trucking along that needs to, and you have the right framework to produce results. So your team has been working, your staff with the CEO, been working on 2 things that I've been involved with, is the integrated planning framework and business planning update, and I think we had a bit of a presentation of that last time, and I'd just like to give you an update on